All right, it is 6:01, and I will call this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Maravilla,
Here.
Vice Chair Roof,
Here.
Commissioner Buchanan,
Here.
Commissioner Berlin,
Here.
and Commissioner Sackerson is absent this evening.
Thank you. Commissioner Sackerson was going to lead us in the flag salute, so I will do it instead. If everyone could please rise. Ready? Go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, moving on to agenda review. Would anyone like to revise the order of the agenda items this evening? Nope. All right. Then we'll move on to our public comment period. This period is an invitation to members of the community to present ideas, issues, thoughts, or suggestions on matters that are not scheduled on this agenda for the evening. And these comments should also be limited to those matters that are within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. If you are on Zoom, you could indicate your desire to provide public comment by using the raise hand feature. Is there anyone in the room that would like to provide public comment on anything not on the agenda this evening? Nothing in the room. Is there anyone online today?
If anyone on Zoom would like to make a comment on an item not on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand at this time. Chair, we have no raised hands.
Thank you. All right, I will close the public comment period and we'll move on to item number 6, which is written communications. We all got a little packet, I guess, with written communications. Was there anything else that we needed?
Just the one item regarding item 8A tonight.
Thank you. Moving on to our consent agenda, we have item 7A, which is our approval of minutes of the July 30th special meeting. Do I have any questions or comments or changes from any commissioners? Nothing. All right. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Nothing in the room. Is there anything online? Is there anyone online?
We have a couple of people online. If anybody online would like to make a comment regarding item 7A, please raise your hand at this time. Chair, we have no raised hands.
Thank you. All right. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from the July 30th special meeting.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Can I have a vote, please?
Vice Chair Roof,
Yes.
Commissioner Berlin,
Yes.
Commissioner Buchanan,
Yes.
and Chair Maravilla.
Yes. I'm terrible at turning this microphone off. All right, that motion passed. So we'll move on to item 8A, which is our public hearing item, which is consideration of Development Code Amendment 24-002, amendments to Title 16 of the Rio Grande Municipal Code regarding wireless telecommunication facilities and finding that this action is exempt from review under the California Environmental Quality Act. Is there a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair Maravilla. Planning Commission, thank you for being with us this evening. I am Andrew Perez, the city's planning manager. And this evening, I'll be making the presentation, presenting the staff report for Development Code Amendment 24-002 regarding the ordinance pertaining to wireless telecommunication facilities. So beginning with a little background about how we got to where we are today, the city's first adopted regulations for wireless telecommunication facilities in 2001, kind of as cell phone usage began to proliferate at a rapid rate. Those regulations were in place until they were revised in 2017. However, the amendments in 2017 were fairly minor. They just really added definitions for commonly used terms and facility processing, and clarified the zoning districts where these facilities can be permitted. This evening, the ordinance being considered by the Commission tonight would really be an overhaul of those existing policies and regulations. The city really is making an effort to kind of push the regulations as much as we can, retain some local control within the confines of state and federal law, which which can be quite challenging. And speaking of these regulations, numerous state and federal laws have been enacted since 2017 that directly relate to how these applications for telecom facilities are processed. There are really four main issue areas that have been impacted. The first being the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, established that agencies cannot at any time stop accepting applications for these wireless facilities. So any kind of an express or de facto moratorium on accepting these applications and processing these applications is illegal under federal law. So this includes any time a new law is passed or enacted. The city is not given any leeway in terms of updating applications or procedures to react to those. So it's something that we're always mindful of and trying to stay on top of. There are also limits on design standards. Any design standard imposed in an ordinance must be technically feasible and published in advance of an application being submitted. Technically feasible means that any design standard can't render a facility to be less effective than it's intended to be. Any permit fees must be cost-based for these applications. This deters cities from really creating exorbitant fees that would otherwise deter applicants from submitting applications for telecom facilities. And in my opinion, the most impactful of these laws are related to shot clocks, or the timelines in which these applications must be processed. It's really critical because if a shot clock expires, an application can be deemed approved, which is a worst case scenario for the city. Foregoes our opportunity to impose any kind of standard or conditions of approval, design standards, anything of that nature. It really becomes a free-for-all for the applicant. So these range from 60 to 150 days, and these are calendar days, not business working days. So just looking at any of these, you can basically shave off a quarter of the time for weekends and potentially holidays. So the shortest of these shot clocks applies to eligible facilities requests, and these are where an application makes or proposes to make a modification to an existing wireless facility. And I'm going to run through definitions of all these types of facilities, but just for this purpose, I'll run through this table kind of quickly. For small wireless facilities, if they're proposing new equipment on an existing structure, that must be processed within 60 days. If it's a new facility without a telecom facility, that needs to be processed within 90 days. Co-locations, which involve placement of wireless services on an existing structure, those need to be processed within 90 days, and any other application that does not fall into these prior three would need to be processed within 150 days. So the proposed ordinance drafted by staff in conjunction with our city attorney's office will establish a new section of the municipal code, it'll be 16.70. Some objectives are to establish permit processes for the various types of telecom facilities, establish location, development, and design standards for these facilities, establish and institute standard conditions of approval that would apply with regards to aesthetics, operations, and performance, and then numerous conforming edits to other sections of the municipal code for the purposes of staying consistent. So I'll run through four of the most common types of facilities that we'll be dealing with in this ordinance. Kind of the umbrella term of wireless communication facility is an unstaffed facility at a fixed location, generally consisting of antennas, an equipment cabinet, and related equipment for the purpose of transmitting voice or data. And then within that umbrella, there are small wireless facilities. These are facilities that are no more than 50 feet in height or are mounted on structures that are no more than 10% taller than the height of adjacent structures. The antennas on these small facilities must be 3 cubic feet or smaller, and the associated equipment at the base station may be no more than 28 cubic feet in volume. As I mentioned before, eligible facilities requests are requests to modify an existing cell tower or base station that with the caveat being it does not substantially change the physical dimensions of the facility. So there's a lot of nuance within that substantial change. It's defined in the ordinance, but in general, it means the height does not increase by more than 10%. The width increases the lesser of 20 feet, or the width of the tower at the level the equipment is being proposed. And with regards to bulk, does not allow new equipment cabinets in general. There are certain exceptions, but generally, no expansion of the base station. And then finally, co-location involves mounting an antenna facility on a pre-existing structure and or modifying a structure for mounting an antenna facility on the structure. So we see this often at the city water tanks where we have existing carriers with facilities, and a new carrier will come in and co-locate on the tank. So into the meat of the ordinance, we'll look at the permit and process for applications for these facilities within the public right-of-way. And for all of these permit processes, it's really driven by the applicable shot clock. You'll see that with these particular applications in the right-of-way, they're subject to either a 60 or 90-day shot clock. Therefore, the permit process is a minor use permit, a plot plan review. The city's municipal code has several types of minor use permits. This is just one of them, the plot plan review. It's an existing permit and process. And really, it's being proposed as the process for these types of applications because we can confidently process these within that shot clock, so we're not facing a deemed approved situation. The municipal code already establishes that the Community Development Department Director is authorized to approve these permits. And specific to the telecom ordinance, the decision is final and not subject to an appeal. One aspect of this process that's unique to the telecom ordinance is that although there is no public hearing, a notice of application will be mailed to all property owners within 500 feet of the project site, just notifying them of the application that's been received, the applicant, project description, probably the applicable shot clocks, just to initiate that communication with the public. Then moving on to the process for permits and applications that are proposed on private property outside of the right-of-way. So this includes eligible facilities requests, small wireless facilities, and co-locations. These would be subject to the minor use permit architectural review. The Community Development Director is also authorized to approve this permit, and he may request review from the ARC if there's some dispute about whether the project meets the design standards established in the ordinance. And so there's some nuance on whether an appeal may be filed here. Modifications to existing facilities, so existing facilities requests, are not subject to an appeal. And that really is because federal law requires the city to approve those types of permits, assuming they meet the certain criteria that's within the federal statutes. However, decisions for new facilities are appealable directly to City Council. A bit different than our typical appeal process. That would go to Planning Commission, then City Council, and that's just with keeping that shot clock in mind so we don't face a deemed approved remedy. Again, here we'd have no public hearing, but notice of application will be mailed to nearby property owners. And finally, any application that does not fit within small wireless facility, co-location, or existing facility request categories would be subject to a conditional use permit that would be processed just as any other conditional use permit per the municipal code, with the caveat that the notice of application would still be mailed to property owners within 500 feet. So again, unique to this ordinance. Another big change in this ordinance is that there are location standards. And so this requires that applicants propose facilities that are in areas that are least intrusive to community character and values. The ordinance establishes preferred locations by zoning district. ranking from Tier 1 to Tier 3, with Tier 1 being the least or not compatible. So Tier 1 includes all of our residential zones in the city, both single-family and multifamily, and the village mixed-use zone, which is predominantly residential. Tier 2 is less compatible, and that includes most of the city's mixed-use zoning designations, which almost all allow residential use, so that's why it's in that Tier 2. And then in Tier 3, the most compatible, the industrial mixed-use zone, traffic way mixed-use zone, regional commercial, public facilities, and agricultural zoned properties, which have by far the least amount of residential development. So should an applicant apply for a permit on a site within the Tier 1 or Tier 2, that applicant must provide factual and verifiable evidence that shows a site in Tier 3 is not available. So it could be technical evidence, correspondence with property owners showing that negotiations have failed. So essentially gives staff the ability to really dig deep and investigate and make sure that an applicant's doing their due diligence to try to find a site within that Tier 3 location. And then within the site itself, once a property is identified, there are further standards to incentivize and encourage antennas on certain structures. So the most compatible structures ranked from least to most compatible. Least would be new structures, such as new towers, new monopoles, followed by historic structures, and then on to existing non-building structures, such as water tanks, that do not have existing wireless facilities. Then more compatible are existing non-building structures with telecom facilities already installed. And then finally, the preferred location is existing buildings on rooftops, within steeples, behind faux architectural features, and those types of applications.
I'm sorry, it's not public comment at this time. Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you, appreciate that.
Yep, thank you. We'll look into that up here. So looking at structural location within the public right-of-way. Again, there's some standards and preferences for where those facilities are located. The least preferable would be new structures. And so this really encourages just using existing or replacement utility poles to add these facilities. And then there is a standard that does not allow for these structures to be placed on decorative streetlights, such as those we have in and around the village. And then moving on to locations in which these facilities are prohibited within private property locations. So anything directly in front of a residential building would be prohibited, also within 300 feet of another facility in the public right-of-way. Any location or site that would adversely affect normal drainage of surface water, obstruct vehicular or pedestrian traffic, cause damage to existing landscaping or trees, located within 10 feet of driveways for emergency response vehicles, and finally those that would impact any kind of underground utilities, so sewer, water, communications, etc. There are also numerous design standards included in the draft ordinance, and these are also, there's a couple in the existing standards and regulations, but this multiplies those by 5 or 6. So beginning with the standard that requires any new facility to be stealth, really by mimicking or blending with surrounding structures or environment. There are standards for height, which would allow these facilities to exceed the maximum height of the underlying zoning district by up to 25 feet on private property. And for facilities proposed in the right-of-way, existing poles can be increased in height by up to 10 feet to accommodate a new facility. With regards to finishing and paint, these facilities must match underlying structures or blend in with the surrounding environment. These applications must include landscaping to, one, screen the facility and also to preserve existing vegetation, and any location of a facility within an existing drip line would be prohibited. There are standards requiring that a facility comply with the municipal code standards for noise. So often these facilities are developed with backup generators and air conditioning to keep the equipment cool, or in case of power outages, keep it running. So all the facilities would need to comply with noise standards and vibration standards in the code. Design standards state that no lighting is allowed on these facilities except as required by federal law. One instance could be the FAA requiring like a flashing beacon for aircraft. Any kind of advertisements are prohibited. There can be signage, but only to identify the owner, operator, emergency contact information, and stuff like that. Furthermore, there are standards for just protection of public health. This is where we start talking about RF emissions. So essentially with regards to RF emissions, there's federal guidelines that say that the city can only require, RF emissions to be compliant with FCC standards, and that's the most stringent regulation that we can apply here locally. So, and then there are additional standards for site security, safety, fire safety, and other applicable laws and permits. However, there's a route for exceptions should one of these carriers or applicants require one. There are 4 reasons in which an exception can be granted. If there's a claim or a reasonable claim that a standard would prohibit or effectively prohibit the provision for personal wireless service. If one of the standards happens to violate an applicable law or regulation down the road, state law changes or federal law changes, before we're having a chance to update our ordinance, then an exception can be made. An exception can be made to location standards if it would require installation in a technically infeasible location or infeasible design or installation method. And then finally, if the exception can be granted if it results in no increase in the visual harms or impacts and demonstrates other benefits to the public. There are also a number of standard conditions of approval that would apply to all of these permits across the board. Kind of the most significant is a expiration of all these permits at the 10-year mark. So this is beneficial in that it requires applicants to reapply, so it gives the city an opportunity to reevaluate any kind of RF data, run a new RF report, which is prohibited otherwise. After the initial installation, the city can't request that a provider rerun their emissions report. So this allows the city to do that after 10 years. Requires general maintenance and graffiti removal of all the facilities, RF emissions compliance. So during the application period, an applicant would submit their RF report, and then one more time when the site is up and running, and then that's kind of the end of the city's authority to request information about the RF emission compliance. Limits testing of any equipment, primarily backup generators during business hours, so it avoids weekends, holidays, and overnight hours, and then also requires the undergrounding of any utilities serving the site. There is a process that's established for potential revocation. So any sites that operate in a manner that is inconsistent with the conditions of approval and or causes jeopardy to the public health can be grounds for revocation. So I believe federal law does require that the city gives an applicant an opportunity to cure and to abate their violations. However, if that goes unresolved, then the city may schedule a hearing for revocation with the Planning Commission. And that decision would be appealable to the City Council. So that kind of sums up the ordinance itself, I just want to finish by saying that staff has found that adoption of this ordinance would be exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act because it does have no potential to result in a direct or indirect physical change to the environment. Would like to note that any future applications for new facilities would be reviewed in compliance with CEQA, so we'll evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. And to conclude with the recommendations, staff does recommend that the Planning Commission adopt the prepared resolution recommending City Council adopt the proposed ordinance amending the municipal code regarding wireless telecommunication facilities, and that it find the project categorically exempt from CEQA pursuant to the state CEQA guidelines. So, happy to answer any questions. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. Patrick, did it get fixed on Zoom? Okay, we're all good.
Yeah, we should be okay on Zoom now. There was a issue at the beginning of the presentation, so appreciate you letting us know about that, but we
Yeah,
have
thank you.
full access now on the YouTube, city's website, and on Zoom.
Are you hearing otherwise? Okay. Okay, thanks for letting us know. Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to double check on that. Do we have any questions? Commissioner Berlin, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I got a lot of questions.
It's okay. It's very
Yeah.
exciting. Stuff here.
This is a lot to process, so thank you for that staff report, Andrew. It's quite complex, the whole understanding why we're doing this and what we're doing, and so appreciate your ability to break it into understandable terms, or at least somewhat understandable. I do have a lot of questions, and I'm afraid I'm just gonna have to kind of go in various, I just scribbled down some notes. So this shot clock that I guess the FCC is the one who came up with this concept to expedite things so cities can't drag their feet. And so I see that as being the driver. Is that the primary driving force of what's motivating this ordinance update?
Not necessarily the ordinance update, but in terms of the permit processes that are being proposed, I would say yes, shot clock's the main driver.
Okay, which gives us 60 to 120 days max? Is that what the time frame was? I think?
150 days would be the most, but
150.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then some of the things that I saw also in there, which I guess is in the public interest as deemed by the feds, the fact that people that will be affected by whatever the structure is, no public hearing, but there will be notification, but no public hearing on tube in the right-of-way and outside of the right-of-way. So the notification that somebody submitted an application will happen both inside the right-of-way and outside of the right-of-way, but there will be no public hearing on that. And is there a reason that you're aware of, or can you kind of explain? We're so used to, in the public domain, bring this to the public's attention. We're talking about, so can you just elaborate on that a little bit? I'm sorry.
No, that's a great question and something I should have gone into more in depth in my presentation, but I'm happy to talk about it now. So it's not a federal requirement, or no law prevents us from having a public hearing. The public hearing process was eliminated with those, I guess, more minor applications, being conscious of the shot clock, because getting on certain agendas can be difficult, and we don't want to be pushing to the end where, oh man, we needed a public hearing, didn't get one, and now an application is deemed approved without any conditions. It could just look, have any kind of visual impacts, and that's a worst case scenario, and this ordinance was drafted with that in mind.
Okay, so really then it's more a function of, if we hold a public hearing, that shot clock is then started and you only got so many days to respond. So the whole thing, my concern is, as a representative of the public, is if I'm living in an area and I get a notice that there's an application being submitted, I still have the right to write you and ask you questions, but it won't be in a public forum. It'll be private communication, but it will become a part of the public record or not. I don't know that.
Yes, and I guess we'll start with the shot clock. So a shot clock starts when the application is submitted.
Okay,
And then staff has typically 10 days to evaluate an application for completeness. If the application is deemed complete, you essentially push pause on the shot clock. Return the comments to the applicant. They'll revise the application, submit that, and when they resubmit, that shot clock starts again.
okay,
So, from day one, we're under the shot clock limitations.
yeah, okay,
And then with regards to the notice, yeah, aside from some of the basic information about the project, there'll be information about how to contact staff, how to view the plans, just
Okay.
open up the lines of communication to try to provide that transparency as much as possible
okay.
outside the public hearing.
Okay, I get it. I understand. It's helpful to hear you expand on that, so thank you. One of the other things that was a little concerning, seeing the location standards, and I understand some of the objectives, I think, are to try to become more standardized and not subjective in the review process. I understand that. So the applicant understands what their criteria is, and it's not a panel up here judging whether it's good or bad. It's either tier 1, 2, or 3. The question I have is, I didn't see anything that alluded to schools and the proximity to schools. I think you group tier 1 as all residential and mixed use. What happens when you're in a combination of residential and mixed use? So you have a church and a neighborhood, and I guess church would be mixed use. I don't know what that. But what happens there? It's combination tier 1 and 2. Obviously, it's not tier 3, which is desired. It's just kind of scored differently on the review process. Do you understand my question?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, and another good question. Well, I guess start by saying most churches are located within public facility zones.
Okay.
So, for example, St. Barnabas Church, they have a faux bell tower in which there's a telecom facility located within that. And really, when we look and establishing these tiers, we looked at residential density. So, and it's not a perfect system, but it's kind of the best we can do based on the confines we have. A lot of our public facilities are, adjacent to residential zones.
Sure.
Up on Rancho Grande, we have a water tank that's, adjacent to a neighborhood. So it's just really hard to, it's proven to be difficult to find ideal locations given the city's land use patterns.
Yeah.
We are mostly residential.
Yeah.
There are very few zones that don't allow residential within the city, so trying to create a tier where there's a perfect fit is
Yeah.
really
Doesn't really
difficult.
exist in a bubble by itself for the
Yeah.
most part. There's a lot of mixed use or neighboring things. So I get it. I understand that. I didn't see any language in what you had in your staff report tonight, but also I don't think I saw anything in the 25 pages regarding school and proximity to schools. And I know that's come up in other areas. So can you address citing in relation to schools?
Schools are typically integrated pretty well into residential communities. They are a zoned public facility, but I think I'm not aware of any, we definitely don't have any in the city where there's a telecom facility proposed on a school property. And even then, the school district would have permitting authority over that. It's not city
I got it.
for land use approvals on school property.
Did you have something, Brian? Sorry. Thanks, Andrew.
Just one other comment about the federal and state requirements, and when you are looking at these types of regulations, the findings for our regulations and findings for new towers need to be based on certain areas like visual landscaping and things like that, and they can't be based on things like RF on the frequency, because those are set by the federal by the federal standards. And so when you're thinking about schools, for instance, it's more difficult for cities to be able to find that there should be a sight distance requirement from a school if it's not based on RF, for instance. So that's where, it
Yeah, yeah.
gets a little bit, we
It's
get a little
overlap.
hamstrung.
Yeah, sure. makes sense. But yeah, thanks for that, Brian, appreciate it. Okay, let's see, where else can I go? Okay, so I got a lot of questions, but I'll just go with this one because it popped into my head. How much time, like, I think some of the objectives you're trying to make happen are to be standards, and so how much time is actually allowed for an operator to cure something that is pointed out to them? You talk about they are allowed time, but how much time, if it's been noted that there's a problem with the site for whatever reason, how much is reasonable time? Is there some other comparative analysis from other cities? Like what is the court of law going to say is what's a reasonable amount of time? Or should we better define that, I guess is my question.
Perhaps we should, and it is fairly broad as written in the ordinance. That's something that the planning commission can make a recommendation as a change, and we as staff can go back and consult with our legal counsel and see if there is a standard, or
Yeah.
maybe check out some other jurisdictions and see what they've instituted and whether it's held up in court.
Okay.
Can
Yeah.
can I just pop in so I
Yeah, sure.
understand what you're referring to? Are you saying once the permit is already granted and it's in operation, and then a problem arises after that?
Actually, I think not. I think as Andrew's storyboard tonight was, something popped up that there's a in the application process, there's an opportunity for them to fix their application if
Oh,
something's
oh.
not
Sorry.
right. Isn't that what you were alluding to in your report?
I
As opposed
responded-
to operational.
I responded to your question the way Virginia
That's
interpreted
the way
it.
I
Okay.
interpreted it,
So-
yeah.
So I'm talking about the application process alone, but certainly that question is needing answer
Mm-hmm.
too. What is the time window for them to fix an actual operational problem?
Yeah, so
pointed out to
that's the
them?
one where it's
So those are two
non-specific.
separate questions. I
Yeah,
guess.
so
Because I could just envision a situation where it's like we have these noise requirements, right? And the generators, and people are like, come out here and make sure this isn't like keeping me up all night, whatever it may be. That's what I thought you were getting at.
Yeah, well, certainly that's a part of it, but I was specifically talking about the application process, but definitely that's needing to be answered as well. How much time is reasonable to fix a problem once it's pointed out to them? It's like, okay, ball's in your court, we've officially notified you there's an operational problem, we've checked, spot audited ourselves, and there's a problem. So both of those, you already answered my first one, maybe you can answer Commissioner Roof's question about operational problem, timeline.
So my answer actually answered Virginia's question. With regards to your question in the application process, once staff deems the application incomplete, the onus is back on the applicant to revise their application. So the shot clock is paused, so they can take a week or 10 months.
I got it. So
Irrelevant.
it basically stops the clock and says, this is incomplete, shot clock stop, you submit it with the corrections and we'll start the clock again.
Yeah, so it's not like you can
Okay.
resubmit on the 59th day and then boom,
Right.
deemed approved.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Roof, for adding in there too. Okay, I got a lot more, but more of them are comments rather than questions, so I'm good. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. We can come back to you if you think of more questions that you want. Commissioner Roof, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have some questions. On page 42 with the tiers, I just wanted to dig into that a little bit. I appreciate the idea of this not compatible, less, most. How enforceable is that? Is that a suggestion, or is that this is what it is?
So any application that proposes to install a facility in a tier 1 or tier 2 location would need to be accompanied by justification explaining why a tier 3 site hasn't been chosen. So it needs to be, the ordinance says, I think, verifiable and factual. So that's where I was mentioning, show us a coverage gap, kind of an exhibit explaining why tier 3 location wouldn't work. Provide some sort of correspondence that occurred between a property owner and a tier 3 location that would not be willing to accommodate a site. It could be technical evidence that topography wouldn't allow for a site to propagate the signal appropriately to close that coverage gap. It could be a whole host of evidence, but this ordinance gives our staff a lot more teeth and more ability to push back on sites, so we don't end up where we were with our most recent application.
Thank you. That's helpful. So just to kind of play it through as an example, so an application is submitted, the shot clock starts. It's found that, oh, they've gone for a tier 1 or whatever it might be, and then you would hand it back. Let's say it didn't have that sheet that explained why they didn't place it in a tier 3. Then you'd say, this is incomplete because you don't have this information, and you'd hand it back. Then the shot clock stops, and then they gather that data, however long that takes, and then it comes back, and then staff would review that explanation to deem whether that's acceptable or reasonable or not. Am I understanding that process?
Exactly. And, in the case that it's not sufficient, we could say, okay, this is incomplete again, pause the shot clock again, and just go through that process until that application satisfies all the requirements of our ordinance.
Okay, because it's also written here under, I'm not sure, so you've got B, ranked locations, and then tier 1, 2, 3. And then under number 1 on page 42, it says, wireless telecommunication facilities shall not be placed directly in front of the primary residence of any primary residential building, et cetera. So that's like an absolute shall not. So would that over even ride the evidence thing, or do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
and you interpret that correctly. It is kind of a concrete, hard line.
So if they turned it back in and said, the only place that I could put it is this place, and it's at the front of the residential building, then you'd say that shall not be. Am I understanding
Correct.
that?
And
Okay.
for more context, one of the few areas in which the city can regulate these facilities is with regards to aesthetics and visual impacts. And so we can point to that being right in front of someone's primary entrance, saying that's too impactful, that's unacceptable, find another location.
And that wouldn't matter as to whether it was, this kind of gets me into my next question, which was a little bit about, I was trying to understand these definitions, and small wireless facility is up to 50 feet. That seems like not a small facility, just like as like in a layperson understanding of small is kind of like a little wild, but and so like in various places in the ordinance, I would see up to 50 feet, and then also is in your presentation as well, up to 10% above the height of surrounding structures. But like, what if the surrounding structures are like 20 feet, and then up to, like, how do you square that circle in terms of the height requirement?
So the definition of small, and going back a step, so small wireless facilities can be up to 50 feet on private property. The up to 10% higher than existing structures is for those in the right-of-way. So that's where that
Okay, gotcha.
distinction is.
Thank you, that's helpful. So right of way is the 10%, 50 feet is the private, okay. Okay, I'm gonna review my other things and pass it on to Commissioner Buchanan, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Commissioner Buchanan, did you have any questions for staff?
Yeah, just a couple. So just to clarify, it seems like others commenting to council might also be interested in how would this, if at all, apply to existing applications that are out there?
So the ordinance would not go into effect until 30 days after city council adopts the ordinance. So assuming we get a recommendation for approval tonight, we would take this to city council in October to introduce the ordinance, and then the following meeting, they would adopt it on consent, and then 30 days after that. So realistically, earliest would be late November, early December. So any application that's currently under review would be subject or be reviewed in accordance with our existing policies and guidance.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. And then I think you already answered this question. I'm just going to ask it a different way. So setback requirements, it seems like some references are out there to cities in California doing that for telecommunication facilities. It seems like your interpretation is that that may be unenforceable based on the specific setback requirements for, like you said, basing it based on like radio frequency from the facility. Is that an accurate statement?
So in terms of like establishing a buffer within the ordinance
Yeah.
that says you can't be located within X feet of this type of use.
Yeah.
In my research, I've looked at other jurisdictions that do have buffers within their ordinance, and they're all accompanied by really the exception process. It says, you know, try to have a buffer of X feet, but if you can't because of some sort of technical inability to provide the service and close that coverage gap, then you'd be allowed to decrease that buffer distance. So it's really more of an encouragement than a hard line buffer. As much as we would want to do that, it's probably not realistic within the eyes of the law.
Okay. That was my interpretation as well. So thanks for clarifying. That's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to go back to kind of the permits that have already are in use right now, or I guess that have already been granted to like years ago, those don't have a 10-year period to them at this point, right? Those are like forever?
That's correct. Yeah, our
Okay.
existing ordinance says those land use permits run with the land, so they're,
So they're eternal.
yeah, until the facility or carrier abandons the site, which we're seeing more often actually with the rollout of 5G technology.
Okay.
They're smaller but more sites, so they don't need these real big sites throughout the city. Just
So with that and with knowing that, that could mean that instead of seeing these freestanding towers like we saw during that last project, we're going to be seeing more little small wireless facilities. I wish I had pictures. My brain is like asking for pictures of each of these things because I can't picture it in my head of what they all look like. But basically, wireless facilities attached to like buildings and things like that. That's really what we're moving towards with 5G. Oh, do you have it? I am a very visual person, so this really helps me.
we're trying, but I can kind of describe it until we get the picture going. But generally, it's, you know, a light post with an extension, maybe 5 or 6 feet on top of that. Looks like just a cylinder, probably a little bit bigger than the lamppost itself. And yeah, let me
Do
try
we,
one more time.
are those things, you probably have no idea of this, are those as powerful as these like other huge facilities that are going up? Or is it just they need more and more places?
So based on my understanding, the 5G sites they don't propagate as far
Okay.
as the 4G, and I'm not really sure the
Yeah,
technical
I-
reasons behind it, but
I figured you wouldn't know
they
that.
need
much.
more of them.
They need more of them, like
they're- but-
more smaller
they're
things in more
smaller.
places.
Yeah.
So, like the water tower thing, we're not going to be really, hopefully, seeing more things like that coming up.
We'll try to get as an example
Okay.
here.
Well, hold on. Let me look at my other questions. So I really loved the whole tier system and that they have to prove, why they're putting it in particular places, especially because what we ran across the last time, that was really obvious. That's why it was needed. Do we need specifics in the proof at all? Do we need to have, or is that limiting ourselves by putting specifics in there of what they need to provide? Because I remember that, with that last project, just using that as an example, they said they contacted, but there was no proof that they actually contacted. And I think there was a couple other instances like that within that project too.
Yes, that's a great question. I'm trying to find it within the ordinance, but the ordinance essentially gives, city staff the ability to create an application listing the required submittal materials that could be amended at any time without amending the ordinance itself. So we
Perfect.
can specify what exactly we need to see.
So when they figure out the loophole, you guys will be able to essentially deal with that.
Close it immediately.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
so There's a lot of good examples out there, and we have good guidance from our city attorney, so
Okay.
we'll make that as watertight as we can.
That's what I was looking for, is how, just knowing the way these kind of things work, like how can we fight against it a little bit? Let's see.
Can I ask kind of a related
Yeah, go
question
ahead.
to that? I'm sorry, I'm jumping in of your time. but,
No, please do.
While we're talking about the documentation piece, is there something here that I'm missing as far as them documenting the need for a facility at all? Like, here's our coverage map, and these are where we have gaps. Like, what is the standard for them, for the wireless group to make these? Is there a threshold in terms of like, there needs to be this much of a gap or documented in this such a way at the outset when they're turning in the application?
At the outset, no. We would only ask for that information if they were asking for deviations or exceptions to those location standards.
Are we allowed to, by the federal or state government, ask for that with the application? Sorry, I jumped in on your question too. Or is that like, are we towing the line? Or is that a
My gut
question
says
for
we
the
might
city
be-
attorney?
We might be towing the line, but we get, like I said, we can certainly ask the question.
Okay,
The concern is that it might be construed as an effective prohibition by requiring that information. But like I said, it cannot hurt to ask, and we'll be sure to note that down and carry that question forward.
thank you. Did that answer you? No, please do. Did you find the pictures or? Okay. Thank you. My brain's still going, what's the difference between that and a collocation as well, but.
Yeah, would that be considered, would that not be considered, I'm sorry. Would
Go
that
ahead.
not be considered a co-location? Because it's already, it's on a light pole, granted, it's not a telecommunications, but, I mean, is it? Or is it a brand new facility?
I think in some cases, and again, I'm not an expert, but if, I think with these small cell facilities, the limited size and scope doesn't always allow co-location.
Okay.
Just because of the height and, sometimes there's just room for one, essentially.
Okay, thank you. I think that was all of my questions. Did anything else pop up from any of my commissioners that they want to ask at this time?
I think I just had one more. You mentioned that the example of being able to revoke a license at the 10-year mark. What would an example of that be? Like, what would happen?
So it's not necessarily a revocation, it's an expiration. So if the facility would want to continue on operating, they need to submit a new application. And then, in the 10 years, there may have been changes to the ordinance or changes to the application form, so they need to provide, revise or amend that facility to comply with the current ordinances. So
Okay.
we don't get in the situation where we have something that was approved in 2001 that's still running based on outdated regulations.
Okay. And if the company does decide to abandon a facility because they're going to these 5G smaller ones, is there a requirement that they come collect the stuff so it's not just sitting there like the 50-foot tower somewhere?
Yeah, I don't know if that's in the ordinance. Actually, it's not in the ordinance, but they would need to apply for a demo permit. And there are conditions of approval that require site maintenance. So when that equipment's removed, the expectation would be that they return the site to the condition it was when it was installed. So we
Okay, so
recently.
they can't just like leave it there like, oh, we're not using that anymore. It just sits.
Correct, and especially if it's on a city-owned property, we have lease agreements, and there's clauses in that would require them to remove that, and if not, there could be financial penalties.
Okay, thank you.
But that's not in the ordinance at this time, correct?
No, no.
Is that something that maybe should be?
Let me review the conditions of approval real quick and then
Okay.
come back to you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have that same, and I think Commissioner Root brought it up and seconded it. It seems like we're putting timeframes on things for them and for us to have to respond to. It seems like if a utility is going to abandon a site, we need to also give them that window that they need to do that in. So it seems like maybe it should be in this ordinance, or maybe not, but it seems to be contractually, like you said, in terms of your lease, if they've given you notice that they're abandoning a site. Now, my question on that is, there's some incentive for them to keep those sites, even if they're non-functioning, open, so they can tie on to it. You know what I mean? It's like, because they've been grandfathered in, if we do go through with this ordinance, we need to incentivize them to close down their stuff that's not being used anymore.
Yeah, it's something to consider. In my experience, just the past few years, we've seen a handful of sites be abandoned. Up on Huebner Lane above Branch Mill, there was, I think, a Sprint site that was abandoned because it was deemed just unnecessary. So they took all their equipment off, repainted their portion of the water tank, and it looks good.
It looks like we do have under, I don't have the page numbers on mine, but there's a discontinuation of use. The facility shall be removed by permittee within 90 calendar days of the discontinuation of the use or of permit expiration. I'm on W, yes. And the site shall be restored to its previous condition.
That's great, perfect. Okay, that's great. Is there any other questions from commissioners right now? No. Nope, okay. Then I will put this over to public comment at this time. If you are a member of the public and have a comment on this particular agenda item, now is your time to come up and say it. If you are on Zoom, well, I'll take the comments in the room first and then we'll go to Zoom, but if you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. If you could please introduce yourself first, that would be great.
Hello, I am Alexandria. I live down on Fair Oaks. A few things. So, I know that we can't get the public hearings on our own agendas for shot clock reasons. My question is, could we either create some sort of pre-application process that encourages them to come and be an agendized item before they submit the application that starts the shot clock? Or could holding some form of hearing on their own be part of submitting the application so that once the notices go out, there's an action item for the people that lets them communicate with the applicant? The other thing is, I noticed when you were on the list of where it's recommended that these new facilities are placed, that putting them in an existing structure was lower priority than putting them on like a new rooftop. Is that how it should be? Or should we be encouraging reuse of existing structures?
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room that has public comment?
My name is Gary Schmidt, resident of Arroyo Grande. Since February 6th, the public has repeatedly expressed concern that the City of AG work on developing codes that provide better protection from the harmful effects of cell tower installations. I shared 5 suggestions during public comment to the City Council on February 13th. Here we are with a proposal which the city staff has carefully crafted. While it addresses many of the evolving changes that affect wireless installations, it does not include many possible protections for AG residents. While there are 6 listed limitations on city authority given in the code, federal code, the Telecommunications Act precedes these limits with these words, "Except as provided in this paragraph, nothing in this chapter shall limit or affect the authority of the state or local government over decisions regarding the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities." The city of Arroyo Grande should do as much as possible to develop requirements that provide maximum protection under the law, protection from the adverse effects of wireless facility installations. Other cities in California have adopted codes that provide these protections. In December 2023, the city of Carmel by the Sea adopted new codes that were drafted with resident protections in mind. I sent this code to the city staff in April, and what we have before us resembles some aspects of that code. While studying the proposed ordinance last night, I noticed that the section "Required Findings" had not been included. I was informed today that all these findings are already included in the section "Findings." But there is woefully little in that section that protects residents. Our existing code is even more robust in its language, where it reads, "Telecommunication facilities shall avoid any unreasonable interference with views from neighboring properties." Many cities in California have been developing protective ordinances since favorable outcomes in court battles hinge on what the limits are in the local jurisdiction code. The following example of protection language is from the Carmel Code in their section, "Findings Required." Quote, "The proposed wireless facility will not result in adverse visual impacts or have an adverse impact on property values." Since protections such as this have been found to be acceptable under federal law, I urge that more time be given to research what these protections are and could be. Let's not adopt a new ordinance now without doing all that can be done to build into them the protections that have been proven to be permissible in other local jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Paula T. Mason, and I'm an Arroyo Grande resident. Couple of things that came up. I think that the revision is really looking good. You've put a lot of work into it, and I appreciate that. There are a couple things that I was concerned about. One is that property owners will be notified if there's a new permit. I'm a mobile home owner in a park, and we are altogether owners of the park. I wonder if that would qualify me to get a notice. The other thing that I wanted you to know is we all know that cell towers represent health problems for people. The radio frequency emissions create health problems. That's why those towers are no longer allowed on school property, because they created problems. So what I really want you to know is that we need setbacks. I live at the very edge of an agricultural field. So if you permit a tower to go right at the edge of that field, that's going to be right over my house. I feel it's really important to have setbacks in such case, away from residences. And with these 5G towers, number one, there are going to be more of them. Number two, they are more deleterious to health. So, we need to do some more research about that and be aware. If there are many more of them, then maybe relocating them away from houses might not be as difficult. I don't know, but we should really make an effort, and there should be setbacks in our ordinance. And I think that's all I really need you to know. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carol Cranfield, and I'm part of the task force over at Sunrise Terrace. You're very familiar with us, I So, but anyway, first of all, I want to thank you. I have a copy of this letter that I will leave with you. In reviewing the proposed language that's included in your telecommunication ordinance documents, please note that nowhere is it stated that there is a documented distance restriction on placing 5G and small cells in neighborhoods near homes and schools, unless I've missed something in review of the document. I'd like to suggest the following language to be inserted in an area that the City Planning Commission deems appropriate to the document. It's written in this letter. Telecommunication facilities should not be allowed to be placed within 500 feet or more from the residential perimeter locations surrounding entire residential communities, including mobile home parks. If you'll take a minute to visit Environmental Health Trust website, numerous cities and towns are passing ordinances. Other communities have passed them to restrict cell antennas near homes and schools, including Petaluma, Mill Valley, Malibu, Santa Barbara, Encinitas, Fairfax, Palo Alto, Walnut City, and San Diego, as well as Bedford, New Hampshire, Mason, Ohio, and more. I don't know if those are in California or what, but it was on the website on their front page. Some of the things they've passed are stated as follows. It prohibits installation of small cells on public utility easements in residential neighborhoods, 500-foot setbacks for small cells for multifamily residents in commercial districts. I'd like to recommend it include residential communities to include mobile home parks, 500-foot separation from schools, and 1,500 feet separation between nodes. If you go to the website, you'll see all of that documented on the Environmental Health Trust. I certainly appreciate all your professional courtesies. My gosh, you've heard us over and over and over again for the past few months, but I implore you on behalf of everyone in Arroyo Grande and particularly our community that you include a reasonable setback area and document of at least 500 feet or greater surrounding the perimeter areas of residential communities, to include communities like ours. Like Paula said, she's right at the front gate. You put a tower in the agricultural area, it'll be right in her backyard. We're all going to see it. So that's all I have to say. Many thanks for your continued community support. My gosh, you guys have been fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Here's a
Are you gonna, I think, yeah. Thank you. Well, I think we went through everyone in the room, so we'll turn over to Zoom if there's any public comment on Zoom at this time.
The first speaker is Ethel. Ethel, if you can unmute yourself, you should be able to speak at this time. Ethel, if you can hear us, please go ahead and speak at this time. Chair, if you give me 1 second, I think I might have an idea of what the issue here is.
Hold tight, please.
All right, Ethel, can you try speaking at this time here? It seems as though we're having some type of an audio issue at this time. Or maybe Ethel is, I'm not quite sure.
Okay, should we try a different speaker and just see if it's us or
Sure, yeah.
which side is coming from?
Yeah, we only have one other person on Zoom with us at this time, but yeah, if anyone else would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand at this time. Chair, we have no other hands raised.
I hear something.
Way to go, Ethel. Way to hang in
This
there.
is going to be a little bit difficult.
We can improvise.
Yeah, so yeah, the problem is we're only going to be able to hear Ethel now, but Ethel, go ahead.
Thank. I want to thank you on the Planning Commission. You saved our bottoms in February. The two of you who voted to prevent that cell tower in front of our front gate, God bless you. We're still facing an appeal. Oh, Lord. Well, here's what I want you to remember. I worked 30 years in telecommunications. This is all about major profits for the cell companies. It's not about providing your grandma with a phone service. That's what it was in 1996 when the Telecommunication Act was put in place. Now they're using that rule to mass produce 5G. And those, I want to reinforce, will you please, planning commissioners, go to ehtrust.org. ehtrust.org. Read the horrid health effects of 5G. These things are going in next to people's bedrooms on telephone poles. There's a reason the International Association of Firefighters refused to allow cell towers and 5G above the firefighters' heads. So please put a setback of 500 feet between a tier 1 and a tier 3. Please put a setback to prevent this 5G entering our homes. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And sorry for the technical difficulties. It was the disco version of myself, I guess. Thank you. Sorry, thank you. All right. Does anyone have? Is there any other public comment? I think we
have no other raised
okay.
hands.
I'm going to close public comment at this time, and we'll turn it back to the commission for any thoughts or if you have any more questions. I know I have some thoughts on this.
I do as well.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to just thank the public for being here, speaking out, speaking up. And we've received the correspondence, and it is also helpful that you're here in person. And that goes for you on the Zoom call. Thanks for hanging in there. But I did have several observations, I guess, in the ordinance language itself. And I'm not going to, I think, get into all the specific details because it's rather mundane. But I would like to forward the notes that I've made and suggestions I made about some of the language in there to city staff and have you consider some of that without getting into it, unless we really want to dive deep into it. I don't.
No, I mean, I think that kind of comes up with what I was kind of thinking around this. I think that I think this is a great draft, part of the process, but I'm wondering if it would be in the best for everyone if this did go back to staff and had some further updates, looking at some of the things that we've talked about tonight and, looking at something like changes that you were looking at. And I think there was a lot of really good things that were brought forward today of maybe we need to look and research a little bit. Ooh, I'm being timed.
3 minutes.
My 3 minutes is up. But of just looking at, doing a little more research and possibly making some changes to the ordinance before we pass it and move it on to, or before we recommend it moving on to city council. That's where I was kind of leaning. I don't know how everyone else feels about that, but I feel like we have the opportunity to really get this thing right. And I think we should take it.
I'm on board with that. I also just wanted to clarify about some questions that were asked during public comment. It seems like we had one question around the prioritization of new structures versus existing buildings. I think we are prioritizing existing buildings over new buildings. This wording combined with the structure there may be a little bit unclear, but on rereading it, I think we are prioritizing it as described. And then to again revisit setbacks and just throw out some specific language here that I've seen in these other codes regarding setbacks. As we described earlier, there are setbacks in some cities' codes, but it's all governed by the exception process, and the exception process explicitly says that an exception will be made if a denial would violate federal law. So it's not as clear as just defining a setback. There is a lot of federal and state law to contend with here, so it's not as simple as just defining a setback in our code here, on my interpretation. So just wanted to answer those questions that came up during public comment.
Thank you.
To reiterate what both of you said, I think it's reasonable to ask staff to think over this issue of setbacks and whether that we can put that in with granted that we know it's going to have an exception process attached to it. And I agree with my commissioner here. Whatever, I was going to say Jamie, but that's not official.
It's okay, you can do that.
That you know, this is probably our only shot to do this, and I really want to make sure we get everything in here that we possibly can to protect our residents.
You know, I concur. I think this is important enough, and you know, some of the timelines are a little daunting as far as a 10-year. I mean, right now it's indefinite. They can have their things and goes. I mean, I question why do we have to give them a 10-year permit? It should be reviewed every couple of years. But again, without getting into the debate about why 10 years, I think we all are in agreement with what we're saying about great first draft, great second draft, whatever. I'm sure you've got a lot of hours into this to get this far, but we're so close. Let's do it all the way. So I concur with my peers.
So with that, I'm going to make a motion. Do I need to have all the specifics that you want in there, or is sending it back to staff to relook at the things that we discussed tonight a good enough motion for you?
I would like to hear a summary on what
What
you'd like
to
to see
look at.
revised, rather than Bruce just handing us a handwritten copy. We want to be transparent and put it out there in the public.
Absolutely.
So, right, so far, according to my notes, really all we have is consider a buffer
Yeah.
from
so
sensitive uses, so we can start there. And, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
Bruce, the 10-year limit is the shortest we can do per federal law. So
Got it.
that's how we landed on 10-year.
I figured there had to be some reason why 10 was put out there, and obviously indefinitely is not the best way to go. But I do like the fact that there are measures in there, and I saw, you know, one of the language in there is about a third-party consultant coming in and actually analyzing the data that's being submitted by either the applicant or by our own staff that's evaluating a sound or a RF, whatever, that there's a third party paid for. The question I have is then who's paying for that third party? Because there's conflict of interest if it's the applicant who's paying the guy to come do their readings. Like, it has to be us as a city, you know, getting the actual data from a third party, an independent third party. So that's just some of the language that I saw in there. It's like, we need to be more specific in there. And you probably have it in your brain, but I didn't see it necessarily on paper.
Yeah, and we can consider incorporating that and amending language.
Yeah.
And I can just explain that in a typical entitlement process and reviewing an application, let's say if there's a traffic study we need peer reviewed, the city would identify a consultant to do that and then execute a reimbursement agreement with the applicant. So they're paying for it, but we're essentially choosing and picking that consultant.
That makes sense to me. And I kind of thought that's how it went, but again, just reading the text, I'm all, well, okay, I see that, but it's a potential if the applicant just thinks they can hire somebody that's going to write the science for them. So anyways.
So Commissioner Berlin, do you want staff to look at that any further? I'm trying to kind of create a little list right now that I can use with the motion. So right now I have like research setbacks and minimal distances, what we can do with that. Research reasonable amounts of time for fixing issues that may come up. more protections for residents in terms of like, visual impacts. I think that was mentioned by one of our public comment.
My list is relatively short. I mean, I did a deep dive through all of it, and a lot of my comments are all good. It seems comprehensive, consistent, integrate with general zoning and land use regulations on design standards. Okay, well, you've already got that in there. You know that's the objective, is to make it as subjective as possible, tied to our land use and zoning and, municipal code stuff. So I don't, that's really not anything other than my own observation. It's not a change to what you've written. The permit term, okay. Bottom of page 47. It won't take long. I guess I probably have more of my comments than actual changes to what you've written. So on the bottom of page 47, we'll do this. It won't take long. Sorry. Are you okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Because you can make the list that way. The permit term, again, 10 years and 1 day from the issue. How do these interact with the various timeframes? How, and that's, I don't know what the approvals deemed either granted or deemed approved. How did those interact with these 10-year timeframes? And I think you answered that. Anything that's already in place is quote unquote grandfathered in until they're applying to dismantle their thing. Is that, and otherwise it's a 10-year, anything going forward is 10 years.
Yeah, all applications that are processed and approved after the adoption of this ordinance would have a 10-year lifespan.
Okay.
And it would not affect anything that's currently permitted and operating.
And the only other question that's related to that, and I don't know that you guys can answer, how does this time frame, how does this account for varying product life cycles? Like, we're going 5G apparently. Who knows how long that's going to be around or it's going to take to implement it. That's not our concern, really. That's for the industry to decide. And so if they can, you know what I'm saying? It's like, if they have the permit in place and we've given them permission to run their facilities, if they need to change out that facilities, there's a process in place for them to do that.
Correct, yeah. And typically that'd be an eligible facilities request.
Yeah.
So, and then once that's processed, that 10-year clock restarts.
Okay. All right. So that was just kind of trying to correlate the equipment needing to be changed out for just applicability. Okay. Inspections, top of page 48, item C. Inspections and emergencies. The language is city or its designee may enter onto the facility area to inspect the facility upon reasonable notice to the permittee. What is the process to notify the permittee is my question. And isn't there something in the process of the application that they need to identify somebody that's available 24/7 in case of an emergency? I didn't see that in the language earlier on the application process. So in other words, you need to know, city needs to know who to contact if it's something that happens at 11 at night, something's on fire, blah, blah, blah. Obviously we have the right for public safety to go on there and do what we need to do. But what is the process for you to just go on to their property and evaluate their equipment? Again, it's kind of that gnats, the devil's in the details.
So
I just didn't see that in there.
Design standard T is city access. Reads the city reserves the right of its employee agents and designated representatives to inspect. So it's that same language. In case of emergency or risk of imminent harm,
Okay.
the city reserves the right to enter upon the site to support, disable, or remove those elements posing the immediate threat.
Yeah, and so I also wrote questions there. Is that upon reasonable notice, do we got to give them 24-hour notice if we're going to do that kind of an inspection, or 48? You just say reasonable notice, and they're going to say it's unreasonable. You only gave us 2 days. Well, in our response, this was an emergency situation. We got to get evaluated. So reasonable is one of those subjective words that gets you into trouble.
And the following sentence says, in the case of emergency, the city reserves the right to enter the site to support, disable, or remove those elements. So that's on page 51.
I got you. I'm
T.
there. Okay, that's
So
fine.
we can
I-
still specify
i-
in-
If the city attorney's comfortable with that kind of subjective language, I'm fine with it, obviously. I'm pointing out something that playing the devil's advocate there. Okay, sorry. That's the way my brain works, sorry. Let's see. Graffiti removal. Let's see. Well, before that, sorry, let me go back to item D, contact information for responsible parties. Again, I think that needs to be a little bit more concise in section D there, whatever. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. Okay, let's see. Stealthing elements. Stealthing elements. I understand the concept of that. No need to comment on that. Okay, H, graffiti removal, page 49. All graffiti on facilities must be removed at the sole expense of the permittee within 48 hours. That seems pretty rapid. Can we give them 10 days, which matches section Q? I think section Q is performance and maintenance, and you use 10 calendar days. So if we've given them notice that their site's been graffitied, I think that should match the 10 calendar days. I mean, I guess if it's something really racist or offensive, 48 hours would be ideal. But if it's just whatever, kids doing stuff, then
Maybe you leave it 48 hours because then it will be done in 10 days, Bruce. Like,
that's true too. Okay, leave it alone. Never mind. That's me being nitpicky. Leave it alone. Okay, section J, the build out period. A building permit's been issued, substantial money's been expended, and construction diligently pursued. Substantial money's been expended. Do you need to define what that is? What does substantial money mean? Okay, obviously they spent money for the building permit. They spent money for blah, blah. Do we need to define substantial money and diligently pursued? Again, some of those ambiguous terms. Okay, sorry, I'm getting a little nitpicky. I get it.
I'm not trying to mess with you, Bruce. I'm just saying.
No, it's good. I'm fine. Let's see. City access, I did that. Better defined. Conditions. I think that's good. The W, discontinuance of use. We talked about that a little bit. I think we talked about abandoning or discontinuing, and I do think this would be the time for us to put a time frame for them once they've submitted an application to discontinue or abandon a facility. 90 calendar days. That seems reasonable. It sounds like that's defined. Is that's good enough? I just wanted to make sure that was there and that accounts for potential delays. You already answered my question about peer review and who pays for it and potential conflict of interest. Denial without prejudice due to a failure to respond to notices of incompleteness. So to promote efficient review and timely decisions, I skipped down at the bottom and again, let's see. The Community Development Director, in his or her discretion, may grant a written extension for up to additional 30 calendar days when the applicant submits a written request prior to the 120th day that shows good cause to grant the extension. Okay, so you just need some good reasons, but that is a part of the review process at that time.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Earlier I misspoke and said after an application has been deemed incomplete, there's really no time frame in which they must resubmit, but it is that 120 days, so.
If they're
thanks
looking for
clarifying.
more time, they have to say why they need more time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Fair enough. Section at the top of page 53. We're almost done, guys. 3 more, I think. Section 16.70, 139, non-conforming facilities. I'm going to jump down to the second or third sentence. Such a facility may be operated, repaired, and maintained, but shall not be enlarged, expanded, relocated, or modified to increase the discrepancy between the existing conditions and the requirements of this chapter. And I don't understand what that means. Can you clarify what increase the discrepancy between existing conditions and requirements of this chapter is? I don't know what you were saying there.
Happy to interpret. So assuming an existing facility does not comply with some of the standards in this proposed ordinance, any modification would have to be more conforming, come closer to conforming. Say the height is, X and this says you can only be 25 feet. Any future modification should reduce that closer to 25 instead of going the other way.
It needs to be better instead of worse. Or
Bingo.
equal to. Fair enough. Okay, that's fine then. Leave it. Let's see. I think that's it. I'm just into some of the subjective words. Reasonable period in section .140. Reasonable period. Maybe you better define that. What that reason? If such a violation is not remedied within a reasonable period following written notice, an opportunity to cure, you may want to define that time frame in that particular section A of 16.7140. And again, if our city attorney is fine with some of that, strike my comment. And I think, the last thing, I'm not sure what I was at here. At the very last thing on page 53, item 2, anytime after 90 days following permit revocation, the city may require the facility to be removed and restoration of the premises as the city deems appropriate. The city may, but shall not be required to store the removed facility or any part thereof. And then the facility permittee shall be liable for the entire cost of such removal. So in other words, if they go away, they don't do their thing to take it down, the city has to take it down, we will store it for them, blah, blah, blah. The city may, in lieu of storing it, convert it to the city's use or sell it, dispose of it in any manner deemed appropriate by the city. It seems like we better give them some written notification to say, hey, we gave you notice to get this stuff out of here. You didn't do it. We did it. And so I don't know if you need to put written language in there that the city shall notify permittee that we've removed your material and you need to remove of it, or it's considered ours now, or whatever. Or who pays for that? I mean, technically, the applicant, the permittee, should pay for our time and labor and efforts in removing that material. The city shouldn't eat that. I close my comments.
It's all good. Okay, so out of that, I got, I'll just read down my list. Research setback and minimal distances, additions of reasonable amount of time fixing issues, more protections for residents based on visual impacts, etc. Ensure consistency and try to limit ambiguities and terms such as reasonable periods.
Yes.
Does that kind of cover a lot of that? And then I just wrote removal costs, but I think that might fit into the prior. Was there any other things that you guys were thinking, or that you two?
I guess I just said, and I know it's a long item, but we kind of done away with the public hearing element of it, and I understand, like with the shot clock, that's really, to meet those time requirements. But just thinking about what went down with this project, like in the past, if folks hadn't spoken up and had a hearing opportunity, that would have just kind of gone through. And I know we're putting this in to try to make those protections stronger so the city can handle those issues. I'm just wondering if there's any way we can reconcile the opportunity for public hearings with the shot clock timeline. And is there any way we can build an opportunity for folks who feel like they're going to, be affected by these facilities to actually have that heard publicly?
So maybe something like reconsider options for public hearing opportunities, or something.
Yeah,
how do you want me to
if it's feasible, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd really like to look at that. I know we have the
reconsider
shot
and
clock
look at feasibility?
of public hearings. Yeah, I think so.
She's taking copious notes about
I'm gonna make it in my motion for you.
And I'll jump in a little bit here too, in terms of feasibility. So there's a section that you probably all will know on the ban on moratoria. So one thing our ordinance won't be able to do is say, as you obviously know, it can't say telecommunication facilities are prohibited in the city. The second thing it can't do is create design standards that create a de facto moratorium. And so that will be sort of the focus of us looking at the site distance requirements. It may very well be that 500 feet blankets the whole city and creates a de facto moratorium. And even if you have the exception in there, you know, we don't want to be doing an exception for every single tower. So we would be looking at those distances, looking at possibly lower distances and seeing, you know, maybe just providing some options on what, if there, you know, if the planning commission feels like there could be a buffer, a hard buffer on certain facilities, what those could be and still not run afoul of the, it was called the third report in order by the FCC.
Is it possible to consider something, I hear what you're saying, I agree with you, I understand the concept, to do a similar type tier 1, 2, 3 sighting distances, you know, so ideally it would be the furthest distance would be the most ideal, and maybe that's tier 3 or tier 1, whichever way you want to scale it. I hear what you're saying, it all depends, because we can't just put an unreasonable limit on sighting distance. That would essentially be a moratorium.
Correct.
But you could do a tiered system that says, this is tier 1, this is 500 feet, and should be no objections to this.
We can take a look at that. And I think that, I'll also say that there are other cities out there that do have buffer zones, straight buffer zones. But also, each city has different geographical, you know, characteristics. Ours just happens to be very residential and residential everywhere, spread throughout the city. So these hard buffers make it very difficult to not run afoul of that.
I just want to say too, you know, we all want our phones to work. We all want to like load our pages and do our data. So like there is an element where we're going to have to weigh the needs of living in the 21st century with our, you know, health and well-being and visual appeal. So I'm sensitive to what you're saying. If I remember from the previous item that kind of led to all of this, you know, a 50-foot tower was going to go in 50 feet behind my parents' house. That's why I had to recuse myself, full transparency of that. I think there must be some happy medium between 50-foot tower 50 feet from your home and 500 feet. Maybe 500 feet is not feasible, but is there some compromise from the 50 feet where we're at to the 500? Just look at that feasibility, I think would be really helpful.
So I interpreted, if my interpretations are wrong, call me out. Research setback and minimal distances and consider the possibility of reasonable buffer zones. Yay?
That's good.
Nay?
I think it's good.
Okay.
We're ready for a motion?
I think so,
Okay.
unless anyone has anything to add. Okay. All right. I'm going to make a motion to direct staff to take back the ordinance and do the following. Research setback and minimal distances and consider the possibility of reasonable buffer zones. Additions of reasonable amount of time for fixing issues that may occur. More protections for residents based on visual impacts, etc. Ensure consistency and try to limit ambiguities in terms such as reasonable periods, and reconsider and look at feasible opportunities for public hearings. I think that's it. It's a lot. You got that?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay. I think that was a motion, so I guess I need a second.
I'll second.
All right. Can I have a vote, please?
Chair Maravilla,
Yes.
Commissioner Berlin,
Yes.
Commissioner Buchanan,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roof.
Yes.
I did it again. I'm so sorry. I'm not good at turning this off. The motion is passed. So thank you, everyone, for this spirited discussion tonight, and thank you for coming out. And thank you for staff, too, for everything you put into this. I know there's a lot more that we're asking for, but I think it's going to turn into a really good product. Okay, we're not done with our agenda yet, so I will...
Thank you for...
Thanks. We have no non-public hearing items tonight, so we're going to move on to item number 10, which is our notice of administrative items since July 30th. I know I had one question, and that was just why was there so many homestays that just kind of popped up?
That was my question too.
Yeah, so each of those homestays that are on that list were homestays that were operating in mid-2020 when we amended our ordinance last. And so this represents the majority of the list of amnesty properties that were granted by the council. So we finally took action and granted approvals for those.
I figured it was something like that, but I thought if I had the question, everyone else would probably did as well. Is there any other questions?
Related to homestay, is that any vacation rental, or is it long-term only, or is it both short and long-term? How is homestay defined, I guess?
A homestay is a rental of up to 2 bedrooms and a home occupied by the owner of the property for a rental term of less than 30 days. So it's a short-term rental, the owner lives there, and it's a maximum 2 bedrooms.
Is there any other questions on that? Okay, is there any public comment on that item? No one in the room? Is there anyone online still?
If anyone online would like to speak regarding the item number 10, please raise your hand. We have no raised hands.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to number 11. Is there any commission communications this evening?
I had one comment, and I mentioned this in my comments to staff, but in reviewing what the city council passed, the vision and the guiding principles, I know we had a long spirited conversation, and I was really happy to note, I feel really positive about the document overall. I think a lot of the comments that we made were incorporated. I did want to make one comment that I was really disappointed to see that inclusivity and diversity was taken out as a guiding principle. And I understand that's the prerogative of the city council to do that. But I think given the political climate that we're in right now, it would have meant a lot to me to see that here. And I was just really disappointed about that. I know that's not staff, I know that's city council, but I just want to go on the record saying that it's a great document, but I was really disappointed about that particularly. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other commission communications this evening? Okay, staff communications?
Yes, Brian Pedrati, Community Development Director. I have a few. So as was alluded to earlier on the ordinance item, we did have the 959 Valley Road cell tower, which is the one proposed on St. John's, went to Architecture Review Committee. And so we are looking to schedule that to Planning Commission, hopefully in October. Another item that went to the Planning Commission was the Housing Element Programs Ordinance Update. That was approved by the City Council on August 27th. One that went straight to the City Council, but is of interest, is the Public Art Project for the Rancho Grande Basketball Court, which is also approved on the 27th. Finally, there was a swinging bridge ribbon cutting ceremony last Friday. We reopened the swinging bridge. It's been open, but the ceremony was on Friday. No limit anymore on the number of people who can cross the bridge. It's been shored up, all the wood's been replaced. So enjoy the one of its kind in all of the state of California. So
I do want to add that my kids are very disappointed that it doesn't rock as much as it did.
I am not disappointed in
I
that.
was like, good.
I should have said during the commission communications that it was a great event. I attended. Commissioner Roof also attended, and the city did an amazing job with that event and just with the project in general. So thank you.
Ask about that. Is it really interesting? It needed it for a long time, and I know it's been a kind of a liability or concern for a while. It came in under budget and ahead of schedule. I mean,
that's correct. Yes.
Wow, that's fantastic. Great work.
Good work by our Public Works Department and Shannon Sweeney, our city engineer. Yeah.
Awesome. Was there any other staff communications? No. Okay. At 7:45, we will adjourn. Thank you.